Hey guys, I believe the video is already on. It's started on its own. Uh, the topic that I want to pick up on, I touched on earlier in a short video. And this is, I guess it could be for the therapist. They should know this. Most of them do. It's just a refresher course. And for the client, if you are new to treatment and don't really understand the terms of confidentiality, because here's how it goes. You come into the therapist's office, they put this pile of papers there in front of you, your head's still in a fog. There's a confidentiality page of the record, blah, 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 blah. You sign it, sign it, sign it. Therapists are so overwhelmed with paperwork nowadays, I think that probably 80%, maybe more than 80% of what the therapist is having to do now in order to obtain the funds from the government and comply with standards is paperwork. But that's for another video. This video, I want to focus specifically on confidentiality as best I can remember it and share this with you so that if you're new in recovery and you are one of those people that don't really know what you can and can't say, what you should not say to a therapist in a treatment program, we're going to cover just a little bit of that here in this video. So let's start and get off into it. Confidentiality of patient records. What does that mean? Well, it means that, like I discussed earlier, whatever you share with your therapist is confidential. Now, is it like sharing with a priest? No, probably not. Close to it, but probably not. And why is that? Well, there's some parameters that are involved with confidentiality of patient records. Everything you say to your therapist is confidential. The exceptions to that are going to be outlined right now. Suicide, homicide, child abuse, or neglect. Now, these are things that are going on currently, or if child abuse is involved, it could be. It doesn't necessarily have to be current. It could be past. Any of these things that I just mentioned, suicide, homicide, child abuse, or neglect, those things the counselor has to look at and scrutinize it very closely. Let's take an example of this. Suicide. Okay, you walk into your therapist's office and you say, I'm down in the dumps. I don't think I want to stay here anymore. I've had it. I've lost everything. I'm tired of it. So immediately the therapist is going to start doing a suicide assessment risk analysis with you. And they're going to start talking about what have you been doing lately? They're going to look at the things the losses in your life. They're going to look at have you been giving away personal items? Do you have a plan? How are you going to do this? And depending on how you answer that, you might end yourself up in some kind of intervention. Now, often that's not the intent, but a therapist has a responsibility to thoroughly, as best he or she can, to do a in-depth analysis and to try to get a picture of where your mindset is at this time. Going in there talking about, well, I want to whack myself and I don't have any money. I lost my house. lost my wife, and only thing I got left is 38 and 3 or 4 bullets. That's about it. Okay, now we got a plan. We got a means. We got a motive. We got a weapon. Those are red flags. Things like that's going to set off your therapist, and they're going to do everything they can to try to get some intervention for you at that point. And that may mean saying, "Hey, just relax, but I want to call somebody to talk with us. Are you willing to let me do that?" A lot of therapists early on will freak out over this, but more often than not, unless there is once you do the analysis, you'll find that the person's not totally committed to that. But again, as a therapist, you never ever take suicidal ideation lightly. It requires a lot of seasoning and gut checks to sort out what that is. Let's talk about homicide. All right. Well, let's take John. He comes into the office and says, "Man, that dude took my old lady. I feel like killing him. I want to kill him." Well, is that homicide now? No, that's not homicide. That's someone expressing a feeling or an emotion of anger. Is there an intent there? Well, that's what we want to investigate. We want to do our analysis a little further. Well, what did John do? And that's really not even relevant to get him talking about it. What happened? What happened? What's going on with John? What's going on with you and John? You and whoever. An analysis. Well, find out if there's a means. Do you have a plan? What are you going to do? How are you going to whack? Why are you going to whack this guy? How are you going to carry it out? Those kinds of things. If a therapist determines that there's a reasonable doubt by preponderance of the evidence that you disclose to them, they may order intervention or try to get you some intervention through mental health crisis counseling. And there's such a thing as the duty to warn. If the therapist feels like that there is a real intent on the client's part to carry out harm or danger to another, then the therapist is obligated to let the police know and let the victim of the crime or know that something may occur, and there's reasonable doubt that this is more than just talk. The guy has means, he has a motive, and due diligence from a counselor is going to mean that he or she will probably report that. More than likely they will. In fact, I'm betting my boots they will. So now we've got suicide, homicide. Let's talk about child abuse. You go into the treatment center and you say, "Man, I feel so bad. That kid just wouldn't stop screaming, wouldn't stop squalling, and I just shook him. I shook him in his crib." Well, guess what's going to happen? Okay, first thing they're going to want to know is, tell me more about this. Is this child with you now? When did this occur? And immediately, they're going to let you know that child abuse requires that this be reported to the authorities. Whether or not the authorities investigate it, that's on the authorities, specifically DHR and probably the local police. But you can bet that there's going to be some kind of intervention if you start talking about that kind of thing in treatment. Now, uh, do not look at this and say, well, golly, yeah, if I got any of these thoughts and I've done any of this stuff, I shouldn't talk to my therapist. Well, yeah, maybe you should. Remember, you're going there for treatment and you don't really know what it is that you need. I mean, you're going over overwhelmed with guilt, you're going over overwhelmed with shame, and these kinds of things may come out. Uh, and I'm not saying calling, the therapist reporting this is a good thing or a bad thing. It's the right thing. Okay. So now we've got suicide, homicide, child abuse, or neglect. Neglect. I mean, if you run around uh, doing drugs and you hadn't been home, your baby hadn't been to school, or you hadn't been fed, hadn't been bathed, ain't got clothes because you've been busy burning up the money and tweaking and whatever else you're doing, and that gets reported. Okay, so now we've got the major issues that you need to know about as a client, and as a clinician, you should be aware of these already. Suicide, homicide, child abuse, or neglect. Now, if somebody comes in there and says, well, I did something, I feel bad because I did something in the past. Well, therapists have different levels of confidentiality depending on their professional affiliation. Substance abuse counselors uh, don't have exactly the same kind of confidentiality as a licensed professional counselor or a social worker or a psychotherapist. Things that occurred in the past, I mean, that's in the past. I wouldn't. I wouldn't try to report something that John comes in and says, well, "Man, I feel bad. I I did this to my friend. We got drunk and I heard him and I almost killed him." So, is that something that you would report to the police? No, no. That's something in the past. That's not something now the client's sharing a regret about something that's done in the past. The issues that you will be addressing right now and potentially in the past are suicide, homicide, child abuse, and neglect. Those things right there are paramount. Know these things before you go and sit down in front of a counselor and talk to him or her. So, how am I supposed to negotiate that and navigate that knowing that? Well, again, there are some things that you may have difficulty telling your counselor, and if you do tell them, you may end up with some kind of intervention. I can say from experience, without discussing any specific case, that I've on numerous occasions thanked the client for letting me know what was going on with them and acknowledged them and complimented them for wanting to get help. Now you know we've got to call someone to help us sort this out and maybe look at it a little closer, because in an instance where we're talking about child abuse, always the child is number one. Always do no harm, protect the child. Always. There's no question about it. It's always. And I might say to the client, I know you as a mom or a dad feel the same, and the drugs or whatever may have gotten in the way, and now you want to do the right thing. So, and I may even encourage them and empower them to call with me or sit there when we call or talk. Uh, so those kinds of things, guys, when you're coming into recovery, be mindful of when you sit down with your therapist and sign those papers. Uh, Go back, and if you have any questions about the extent of confidentiality, talk to your therapist. Uh, like I said before, uh, know who you can talk to, and know that there are some limits to that confidentiality when you're talking to a professional therapist, a substance abuse counselor. Uh, your sponsor, uh, that's a whole different thing. Sponsors aren't necessarily obligated by any ethical standards to do or not do. Just be mindful of what you can and cannot say, and be cognizant that when you do discuss those things, that they may end up with some kind of intervention, which the, may breach the confidentiality uh, for the greater good, because the first rule is do no harm. Okay, and so that's just a brief overview of confidentiality. I hope I hadn't molded up too bad for you. If you've got any questions or clarification you need, talk to your counselor or therapist about this. And remember, uh, when you're talking to your therapist or your sponsor, uh, be mindful that you've got to know that you can trust that person implicitly, and until you can get to that point, I'd be building up to get there. Remember, recovery is a process. It's not an event. It doesn't happen right now. I mean, you can't be drinking 25 years or doping 10 years or whatever and come into a rehab program in 2 weeks, say, I'm ready to go, I'm cured. It's not an event, it's a process. Just like this relationship thing with your therapist. A good therapist should be able to go ahead and initiate that therapeutic relationship with you early on. It's pretty much a sense of the spirit of the person you're talking to. They they will know, or they will have a gut feeling as to whether or not they trust you. So again, confidentiality is not 100% confidential when you're in a treatment program. As a client, be aware of that. As a clinician, be mindful of those areas in your practice where it's not, and work on developing a way to encourage the client to come along with you in this process, versus making them a perpetrator. Don't make them a perpetrator in this process. Uh, they already feel bad enough that they're coming to you with this. And the areas that I'm referring to now: child abuse and neglect, suicidal ideation, uh, homicidal intent. When you address those things, be very mindful that you make no judgments about the client. Of course, we are making an assessment in our mind, but bring the client along with you in that, and get their input, and try to encourage them along, because it's a scary process. It's a scary process knowing you're going to sit down and talk to a complete stranger and maybe tell them you thought about whacking yourself last night. Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you for your time. I want to encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel, and maybe we'll do future videos on other aspects of client and counselor relationships, or any number of topics. You put something down there in the comments and I can pretty much jaw about it. Thank you.